Good evening, friends. Welcome to the Embassy of Spain, and a special welcome to all the literary establishment that is today well represented here: editors, publishers, translators, authors. It's really a privilege to have you here with us today. And there are so many things that we are going to do today that I really don't know where to start. But I've got to be brief. I've got to be brief because here at the Spanish Embassy, as you know, we believe that sine cerere et vino friget Venus. In the tradition of tertulias and tapas, we believe that food and wine and fruitful personal connections and intelligent conversation are a great cocktail. So in 1 hour, we will start a real, what we could, I'm sure, call a work event with Spanish wine and with Spanish ham and with all those things. Exactly 1 hour. So I'm looking here at all the speakers. You shall all be brief. And me, well, I'll try to be brief too. The main event is going to be the presentation of the wonderful book of translation of the poems by Joan Margarit. I get emotional. Even just pronouncing his name, I get emotional because he's such a fantastic poet. A great Catalan poet. He was awarded our highest literary distinction, the Cervantes Prize, the highest literary prize in the Spanish world. But I'm not going to speak about Margarit because we are, today here, we have the privilege of having Luis García Montero, a great living Spanish poet, a great friend, and also the director of our Instituto Cervantes, the equivalent of the British Council, and he will talk about Margarit. We'll also listen to some of his poems. But before that, we're going to have something, what I think is an extraordinary ceremony. It's like a novel of mystery over 150 years. A lost manuscript vanished from the Biblioteca Nacional. What happens at the Biblioteca Nacional? Why do manuscripts vanish? We have got the director of the Biblioteca Nacional here who will tell us the story about this disappearance. But we have here Professor Ángel García of the University College London, who discovered the vanished manuscript. After 150 years, with an eagle eye, recognized the work, researched it, and now wants to give it back to the National Library. So I'm not going to say anymore because we've got the protagonist here, and Ángel himself will tell us how it happened, and Ana, who is a very dear friend, who has directed the Biblioteca Nacional de España since 2013? 2013, will tell us what they plan to do with the manuscript. By the way, people go to Madrid and they go always to El Prado or to the Thyssen. La Biblioteca Nacional de España is one of the most beautiful buildings in Madrid and in Spain. It is full of history. It has got Godoy's library. It is one of Godoy's libraries. It's one of the most beautiful libraries I know in the world. So next time you go to Madrid, make time to visit the Biblioteca Nacional de España. The manuscript is a polemic. It's written by somebody who was very afraid of the theater and very afraid of freedom and especially afraid of women. So, of course, he was a man. And he gave advice on what to do about women characters in plays. Of course, the best thing would be not to have women characters at all. But if there were women characters, at least have men play that role. The authorities in Spain didn't agree with him because just a few years later, a royal decree established that women could play women characters. Evidently, the authorities thought that the prospect of handsome young men disguised as women was probably a lot more dangerous to public morality than the real act. But, you know, maybe here we could say, why should we be interested in such a treaty and such a line of thought? This is horrible. I mean, no, we should learn from it. We learn from history, and we learn from such polemics. We learn of the power of the theater and of the art, the corrosive, the freedom-inducing power of the theater. And we learn that we have got to defend freedom, we have got to defend desire, we have got to defend love at every generation. So I think that this manuscript is really, it's precious. And the backdrop of the manuscript, I think it is also very revealing. Why was this man afraid? Why did he wrote this? Because the Siglo de Oro was beginning, was starting. Because we would have Tirso and Lope de Vega and Calderón de la Barca and Ana Caro de Mayén, a woman playwright, and all of them writing powerful women's roles and playing, writing plays full of freedom, full of desire, full of love. So that generation won, and it won in Spain and in England, where Shakespeare was writing and all his contemporaries. In fact, it has always been, I think, the case in the cultural history of the two countries that they have cross-fertilized each other. And the centuries where contact between Spain and England, literary contact, cultural contact, was especially strong, were also the best centuries in our culture. We influenced each other. We have always been good to each other culturally. And I think that is the case today, too. And here at the embassy, and also Instituto Cervantes and the Biblioteca, we are here to help those who are in the battlefront of culture to realize that dream of having the two cultures continue to enrich each other. Translations are a very clear case. Literary festivals, participation in each other's literary festivals, it is another case. Young people in Spain and in the UK, they have very similar lives, very similar experiences. They try to make a decent living, which is not far for you, not easy for young people these days. They try to be able to determine their sexuality, their gender, their identity as human beings in a world that is many times hostile to them, be it rural parts of Scotland or of La Mancha, or the outskirts of big cities. They have a lot to tell each other. We have put outside a few books called 10 to 30. There are 3 books with 30 authors. 2/3 of them are women, of between, I think, 30 and 40 years of age. Miguel, correct me if I'm wrong, or 20 to 30?
No, 30 to 40.
30 to 40, well. There seems to be some disagreement there. But anyway, young people. And I've read some of them. They are extraordinary authors, especially the women. I must underline, in this case, the women. Incredible stories. For example, Cristina Morales, who came here, I think, last year, she tells this story about 4 intellectually challenged women that escape institutional care and get to live together in an apartment in Barcelona. And all their adventures and their incredible fight to retain their independence, and their dignity, and not to be patronized, and to have whatever sexuality they want. It's an incredible book and hilarious. So you should read it. And I have to be brief, so I cannot mention all the others. But let me finish with the book by Ana Iris Simon, which is called Feria, circus, traveling circus. Her grandparents were people who traveled as what you call here travelers, something similar. They were traveling fairground workers in the center of Spain. And she was born in La Mancha, in a small village. She says that she was, at a point in her life, she was ashamed of putting in her passport where she was born, in Criptana, I think. And she would put Madrid. And then she went on to live to Madrid. And there is a paragraph in the book which I'm quoting by heart. Maybe, I'm sorry, Anna, if I misquote you. But more or less it is, she says, they have tried us and we have come to believe that not being able to afford the car, not being able to to afford an apartment, not being able to have a decent job and having to change jobs all the time, and not being able to have children, that is freedom. And we seem to believe it. I think it is a very good paragraph, and it shows that it is experience relatable, I think, to young people here in the UK. Well, anyway, I've started by not being brief, but I'm finished now with the description of the act, and it is with pleasure and with relief that I give the floor to Professor Ángel García. Thank you very much. Sí, sí, puedes. Perfecto.
Bueno, para mí el placer es poder contar la historia de este famoso manuscrito, Abusos de comedias y tragedias. En el año 1983 recibí un catálogo del anticuario inglés Richard Hatchwell, en el que figuraba un manuscrito con título de Abusos de comedias y tragedias. Epígrafe que me hizo recordar otro título que había tenido ya ocasión de leer.
Profesor, vamos a parar un poco para que traduzca la intérprete, ¿vale? A cada poco paramos un poco para que pueda traducir la intérprete, ¿vale?
Más despacio.
No, usted lee 3 o 4 frases o 5
Ya.
y ella traduce.
Muy bien.
Ella le interrumpirá, que es muy...
Ok, con mucho gusto, ¿eh? De modo que este epígrafe me hizo recordar otro título que había tenido yo ocasión de leer en un libro que Emilio Cotarello había publicado en 1904, dando noticia documental de la controversia que entre finales del siglo XVI y gran parte del XVII se había suscitado en España acerca de la licitud moral de las representaciones teatrales.
So it's with great pleasure that I want to share with you the story of this manuscript. I came across this one in 1983 in a catalog that I received from an antique bookseller here in the UK. And it immediately reminded me of another book that I had read back in by Emilio Tocarello that was written in 1904, where he was reporting the controversies in Spain around the 16th and 17th century related to the morality of theater plays.
En este libro que acabo de mencionar, menciona Cotarello un manuscrito anónimo titulado Abusos de comedias y tragedias, cuyo texto, sin embargo, como él mismo nos indica, no puede transcribir porque este documento se encontraba desaparecido de los anaqueles de la Biblioteca Nacional de España desde antes de la época en que fuera director de esta institución don Agustín Morán, quien ejerció como director de 1854 a 1861.
And he mentioned a manuscript titled Abusos of Comedies and Tragedies that he could not transcribe because he said the book was missing from the Spanish National Library, and it had gone missing even before Agustín Duran's directory at the library.
La escueta referencia de Cotarello a este perdido manuscrito incluye, sin embargo, un breve resumen de su contenido, el cual había sido elaborado 100 años antes, en 1804, por el bibliotecario Casiano Pellicer, quien sí tuvo acceso al manuscrito y pudo leerlo cuando éste formaba parte de la Biblioteca Real.
However, Tocarello included a summary that he had read from a book published 100 years before, in 1804, written by a librarian, Casiano Pellicer, who had the opportunity to read this manuscript when it was part of the catalogue at the Royal Library.
Decidí, pues, comprar a Richard Hatchwell el manuscrito que aparecía listado en su catálogo y al compararlo con el resumen que Pellicer daba del manuscrito desaparecido de la Biblioteca Nacional, pude llegar a la conclusión de que se trataba de un mismo y único manuscrito. Continué después mi comunicación epistolar con el anticuario Richard Hadwell, quien en una de sus cartas, y atendiendo a una pregunta que yo le había formulado, me comunicó que originalmente el manuscrito había formado parte de la colección de manuscritos de Thomas Phillips, que nació en el año 1792 y murió en el año 1872. Este conocido anticuario y coleccionista de manuscritos, nacido cuando finalizaba el siglo XVII, fue testigo de cómo, durante el siglo XIX, se estaban destruyendo a mansalva muchos valiosos documentos.
So I decided to purchase this manuscript from Richard and Hadwell and was able to determine that it was indeed the missing manuscript from the National Library. Later on, in our correspondence exchange with Richard Hadwell, I was able to get an answer to my question, and they confirmed that this was indeed part of the original collection of Thomas Phillips, who lived between 1792 and 1872, a very well-known collector that witnessed also the destruction of many valuable manuscripts throughout the 19th century.
El citado Thomas Phillips, ante esa masiva destrucción de documentos, decidió adquirir 60.000 manuscritos, dando lugar con ello a la creación del vocablo velomaniac o manuscritomanía. Phillips entró en comunicación con el primer ministro de Israel con el propósito de que esta inmensa colección de manuscritos se integrara en la British Library, pero no pudo lograr su propósito. Después de este fracaso, su colección de manuscritos se fue dispersando en diversas direcciones durante un periodo de 100 años en el que un número considerable de estos manuscritos fue vendido a colecciones nacionales de Alemania, Bélgica y Holanda.
Thomas Phillips, when he witnessed the destruction of so many manuscripts, decided to start buying them. And he accrued a collection of over 60,000 manuscripts, even to the point of coining the term manuscript mania, as he was described. Then he tried to have them sent to the British Library, but failed. And over the next 100 years, the manuscripts were either lost, sold to different national collections in Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands.
Pero de esos ya citados 60.000 manuscritos, también se vendieron algunos anticuarios, siendo así, al parecer, como el manuscrito de Abusos, de comedias y tragedias llegó a manos de Richard Hadwell, residenciado en Little Somerford, pequeña localidad de unos 350.000 habitantes en el condado de Wiltshire, de quien yo, como ya he indicado, lo adquirí.
But some of those manuscripts were also bought by antique collectors, and that's how this one, Abusos of Comedy and Tragedy, made its way to Richard Hadwell and spent a very long time in a small village in Wiltshire.
Propietario ya del manuscrito, mi intención fue siempre que el documento fuera reintegrado a su antiguo hogar en la Biblioteca Nacional de Madrid, a la que comuniqué entonces mi hallazgo y propósito. Pero antes de hacerlo, antes de devolverlo, quise examinarlo a fondo y así en 1989 publiqué en Alemania un artículo en el que informaba sobre el hallazgo del documento, describía sus contenidos, examinaba indicios internos y características paleográficas que permitían concluir que el manuscrito había sido escrito entre 1580 y 1583. En ese mismo artículo de 1989 indicaba también mi intención de publicar en su día una transcripción completa del documento.
So, manuscript in hand, I expressed my desire of having it returned to its former home at the National Library in Madrid. But before, I wanted to examine it thoroughly, which I did, and then in 1979, I published an article in Germany announcing my findings and describing and analyzing the manuscript in detail. I was able to determine then that it was written sometime between 1580 and 1583, and I also expressed my intention of having it translated as well.
En esta coyuntura, a comienzos de 1990, un año después, recibí una carta de Marc Dicha, conocido hispanista francés, quien, habiendo leído mi artículo de 1989, me preguntaba si podía reservarle esta transcripción para su publicación en Criticon, revista francesa de tema teatral dirigida por Dicha. Mis planes de transcripción tardaron, sin embargo, en realizarse más de lo que yo hubiera deseado, y no se llevaron a cabo hasta bastantes años más tarde, en el 2019, cuando, cumpliendo la promesa que había hecho años antes a Dicha, publiqué en su revista Criticon una transcripción del manuscrito con abundantes notas en las que se localizaban las fuentes de las numerosas referencias bíblicas, patrísticas y clásicas, cerca de 78, en la que el documento apuntalaba su argumentación, aunque sin indicar su procedencia. La constatación de esta exacta correspondencia entre la argumentación y las fuentes utilizadas incrementaba la seriedad del documento con un adicional elemento de valor añadido.
And then in 1990s, the beginning of the 1990s, Marc Dicha wrote to me saying that he had read the article and wanted to publish a transcription in Criticon, which was a French theater magazine. However, the plans took a lot longer than expected, and it was not until 2019 that I was able to keep my promise, and a noted transcription of the manuscript was finally published in Criticon. It contained detailed sources of biblical and classic references that the author had used to support his arguments. And it's this correlation between sources and arguments supporting it that gives the seriousness to this manuscript as well as its added value.
De esta manera, a finales del año 2019, mis estudios y publicaciones sobre el manuscrito habían alcanzado su meta y mi antigua promesa a Marc Dicha había sido cumplida. Era ese, por lo tanto, el momento de retornar el manuscrito a su antiguo hogar. Entré ahora en comunicación con el director del Instituto Cervantes de Londres, don Ignacio Peiró, quien comunicó el asunto al director del Instituto Cervantes de Madrid, y ésta, a su vez, se puso en contacto con la directora de la Biblioteca Nacional de Madrid. Este interés expansivo en la devolución del manuscrito me cogió de sorpresa, ya que mi intención inicial se limitaba a poner el manuscrito en manos de don Ignacio Peiró para que éste lo hiciera llegar a la Biblioteca Nacional como parte de la misión cultural del Instituto Cervantes.
And then the journey ended at the end of 2019 when, after all my studies and publications, I considered I had kept my promise and was done working with the manuscript. So it was time to have it sent home. So I contacted the director of the Instituto Cervantes in London, Ignacio Peiró, who then contacted the director of the Instituto Cervantes, who then contacted the director at the National Library in Madrid. I have to say that such interest in having the manuscript go home took me by surprise. I had just initially planned to give it to Ignacio so he could then give it to the library as part of the cultural mission of the Instituto Cervantes here in London.
Este solícito interés me confirmó, sin embargo, algo que yo había ya experimentado años antes en el Archivo Municipal y en el Archivo Histórico Provincial de Córdoba, ambos dirigidos por personas que cuidaban de la documentación con un esmero casi maternal, que contrastaba con la desidia e incuria que en el siglo XIX habían facilitado la desaparición o tránsfuga al extranjero de manuscritos que, como el de Abusos, de comedias y tragedias, terminaron en lugares inesperados.
Such interest confirmed an experience that I had had years before at the municipal archives in Córdoba, where I saw the people working there almost caring for the manuscripts with motherly love, which is a complete opposition of the disdain these manuscripts had been treated with in the 19th century, and hence was the journey of abuses of comedies and tragedies.
Era pues evidente que no solo ya no se miraba distraídamente a otra parte cuando un manuscrito era obligado a transmigrar, sino que por el contrario, cuando uno de ellos emprendía el camino de vuelta, se le buscaba y recibía con la misma solicitud con la que el padre de la parábola salía al encuentro del hijo pródigo. Y es por ello, por lo que hoy tenemos el placer de poner el peregrinante manuscrito Abusos de comedias y tragedias en manos de la directora de la Biblioteca Nacional de Madrid, Ana Santos Aramburu.
So it was obvious then that we were no longer looking the other way whenever a manuscript was forced to migrate. And this journey home finds this manuscript being welcomed just as the father welcomed his prodigal son. And today, this wandering manuscript now can rest in the hands of the director of the National Library in Madrid.
Ana, por favor, unas palabras.
Muy buenas tardes. Qué día tan emocionante y qué tarde llena de agradecimiento, profesor García, porque no es fácil encontrar personas con esta generosidad, este compromiso y sobre todo este conocimiento para ser capaces de hacer un acto de devolución y de restitución de una pieza de tanto valor a las colecciones públicas del Estado español. Lo primero, muchas gracias.
Well, good afternoon, and what a moving day. I'm full of gratitude, Professor, because it's not always easy to find people as generous, committed, and with the knowledge to return such an important piece to the public collections of our country.
Muchas gracias también, embajador de España, por organizar este acto y también por la labor que siempre estoy segura que llevas y vas a llevar en favor de la cultura española y de las relaciones culturales entre ambos países. Gracias también al Instituto Cervantes, a su director, Luis García Montero, y al director del Instituto Cervantes en Londres, Ignacio Peiró, por la labor de mediación también generosa y comprometida con la cultura española y, desde luego, con la Biblioteca Nacional de España.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for hosting us today and for all the work that you have been doing and you will continue to do, bringing both the countries of our countries together. I want to also thank the Instituto Cervantes, its director, Dr. Luis García Montero, and Ignacio as well for all the hard work.
Como podrán comprender todos ustedes, cuando esta noticia, a través del director del Instituto Cervantes y de la directora del Instituto de Cultura del Instituto Cervantes, Raquel Zelaya, llegó a la Biblioteca Nacional, fue un día de alegría y de mucha emoción. Lo primero que hicimos en la Biblioteca Nacional de España es, obviamente, comprobar la veracidad de estas informaciones con la propia información que en la Biblioteca Nacional teníamos.
As you can imagine, when we received the news from the Instituto Cervantes as well as Raquel Telaria, we were filled with joy and excitement, and the first thing that we did was verify the information against our own records at the National Library.
Y así fue que descubrimos que este manuscrito aparecía ya citado con la asignatura M41, asignatura que vamos a intentar mantener, en el primer inventario general de la colección de manuscritos redactado en el año aproximadamente 1830. Y aparecía bajo un título, otro título, Comedias, consultas y pareceres de universidades y teólogos particulares sobre lo lícito o ilícito de ellas. Aparecía, estaba citado, pero en cambio ya, en otro manuscrito posterior, el índice de manuscritos de la Biblioteca Nacional que hizo el entonces director Agustín Durán en el año 1860, este manuscrito M41 ya no aparecía. Evidentemente, el manuscrito desapareció antes del año 1860 de la Biblioteca Nacional de España.
And indeed, we found this manuscript included in the catalog with the catalog number M41 in the first general inventory that was conducted around 1830. However, it was registered under a different title. Then, in the second index that was conducted in 1860 under Agustín Durán's, M41 was already missing, which means that the manuscript disappeared from the library sometime before 1860.
Evidentemente, ahora cuando va a volver ya a la Biblioteca Nacional de España, a su origen, y digo a su propio origen porque realmente formó parte de la primera colección fundacional de la Biblioteca Nacional de España, de la Biblioteca Real, fundada por el rey Felipe V en el año 1711. Es, por lo tanto, su valor patrimonial enorme, pero también su valor en cuanto al contenido, también estudiado por el profesor García González. Nosotros, en cuanto vuelva a las colecciones, lo primero que vamos a hacer es, por supuesto, intentar conservarlo de la mejor manera posible. Nos gustaría restituirlo a su volumen original, ojalá aparezca en algún momento.
And now it's going back home and to its very own origins, because this manuscript was part of the collection from the first foundational collection at the Royal Collection that was created by King Philip V in 1711. So it's not only part of our rich heritage, but also its contents, as described by Professor García González, are going to be studied as well. So first thing, we will try to restore it to its original state, and then we'll take it from there.
Lo vamos a digitalizar para que esté disponible para todos los investigadores y estoy segura que su acceso, difusión y conocimiento va a permitir probablemente hacer sobre él y otros manuscritos de la valiosa y rica colección de manuscritos literarios que tiene la Biblioteca Nacional de España, muchos y nuevos trabajos de investigación.
We are also going to digitalize it so it can be accessed and used by all researchers. So access and dissemination is key. And this manuscript, together with other manuscripts that are part of the rich literary manuscripts collection in the library, I'm sure are going to give way to a plethora of new research work.
Es, por lo tanto, un acto de restitución, pero es también un acto de apertura a un nuevo conocimiento, a unas nuevas investigaciones y, por lo tanto, algo que enriquece a colecciones patrimoniales, pero que de alguna manera también nos enriquece a todos. Así que muchas gracias otra vez y esperemos que existan, nos encontremos con muchas más personas con este nivel de generosidad y conocimiento. Muchas gracias, profesor.
So it is indeed an act of restitution that I think is going to open the door to new knowledge and new research that will enrich us, all of us, as well as our heritage. So thank you again, Professor. I hope that we come across people as generous as you in the future as well.